Abernathy, and welcome to Master the NEC, where we talk about the National Electrical Code. Today's episode is part 5 of a 7-part series. We've talked about Article 680, and up to this point, we've covered the general requirements in Part 1. We've covered the permanent installed pools in Part 2. In Part 3, we've talked about storable pools, storable hot tubs, and storable spas. In Part 4, we talked about hot tubs and spas. We got into the nuances in there. So now we're up to Part 5. Now, what I want to talk about in Part 5 is we're dealing with fountains. And fountains are unique. We are not talking about a portable type of fountain. That you're going to go over and look in 422. Now, again, my name is Paul Abernathy, and I sit on Code Making Panel 17, which deals with spas, hot tubs, pools, what have you. And I also sit on Code Making Panel 5, which is generally known for grounding and bonding and what aspects of Article 250. That's kind of what it's mainly known for. And so I sit in there for the NFPA, and so through the years, I've gathered a bit of knowledge on these certain things. And of course, I also stand on the shoulders of some great people out there who have taught me along the way. So this series is my way of kind of teaching the code to you, giving a little bit of it back, and explaining the nuances that deal with Article 680. So if you haven't watched Part 1, remember most all of these parts are going to reflect back to the requirements of Part 1. So you need to know the difference here. You need to know what's in Part 1. So go watch that one if you haven't. When you're dealing with permanently installed pools, you want to deal with Part 2, and you got to understand that one is a long one. So that's about 2.5 hours. That's the longest one in the series here. Every other one's going to be rather short, about an hour or so. Some even shorter than that. Like, for example, Part 7, hydro massage bathtubs, is going to be very short. So it kind of taking them, it allows you to go watch the one you need to watch for what you need to get out of it, instead of watching the whole thing. Maybe you don't want to know anything about hot tubs or spas, so you don't watch Part 4. Maybe you don't care about Part 5 for fountains, but you do need to know about permanently installed pools, so you go and watch Part 2. So that's why this has been broken down into a 7-part series. Again, I'm certainly not a know-it-all, don't know it all. I learn something new every day. Again, I'm blessed to be associated with people that have helped me learn through the last 30 years of my education and teaching. Yes, I do see these two degrees on the wall, one in engineering and one in business management, mean absolutely nothing when it comes to NFPA 70 and understanding the National Electrical Code, and they most certainly don't mean a thing when it comes to understanding NFPA 70E, safety in the workplace. Nothing. They don't mean anything for that. So, at the end of the day, it's all about what you learn here watching us talk about the National Electrical Code and cracking that book open and actually reading it and learning it. And if you do have questions, remember you can always send me questions at info, that's INFO, at masterthenec.com, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Send them, visit our website at masterthenec.org.net.com, go to our message board, post your questions, get on Twitter, follow us on Twitter at masterthenec, and of course we have a Facebook page as well you can join in. Okay, so let's get started talking about fountains. And what's the nuances? I just came back from the NFPA conference, and there was quite a few fountains that I saw out there. They were aesthetic fountains. They were there for looks. They were permanent. And those are the kind we're going to talk about today. All right, so away from me, let's get on to the show. All right, so here's what we're going to deal with. We're going to deal with Part 5, dealing with fountains. We're going to talk about the general requirements. We're going to talk about luminaires, submersible pumps, and other submersible equipment that has to do with fountains. Junction boxes and other enclosures that are associated with fountains. You're going to see a lot of these are going to send you back to other areas of the code as well, just kind of for clarity. You've got some grounding requirements. We got some of the methods to achieve those grounding requirements. We got cord and plug connected equipment. We got signs that are associated with it, and we've got GFCI protection for the adjacent receptacle outlets that might be near these fountains. Okay, so let's just jump in. So here's a fountain. Okay, so all of this constitutes the fountain. This is all incorporated as part of the fountain. This happens to be the center component. But there's a fountain here, incorporates all of this perimeter right around here is all part of this fountain. So what are the general rules? There's where you got to get into the nitty-gritty. It says general rules here is that The fountain shall comply with Part 1 and Part 5 of this article. It also reminds you that Part 5 does not cover self-contained portable fountains. Again, they're going to need to meet the requirements of Part 2 and Part 3 of Article 422, okay, for appliances. Okay. Now, fountains with water that are common to a pool shall comply with Part 2 of this article. So anytime we have a fountain that it's incorporated with a common water is shared between the fountain and a pool, then it's going to be considered Part 2 as well. For permanently installed pool is going to be applicable here. Okay, so that's going to apply. So keep that in mind. If it's a pool and a fountain and they have common water, then it's going to also have to meet Part 2. Otherwise, you're trying to meet Part 1 and Part 5. So we're talking about equipment, luminaires, submersible pumps, and other submersible equipment that might be inside of this fountain are all going to be covered under 680.51, and we're dealing with A through G, and that's GFCI protection requirements, the operating voltage limitations, the luminaire lens requirements, the overheating protection, wiring methods, servicing of the equipment itself, and then of course the stability of the equipment and its fastening requirements. So 680.51a talks about GFCIs. All right. And let me get mine started here so I can be with you. Okay. Now it says ground fault circuit interrupters, luminaires, submersible pumps, and other submersible equipment. It says unless listed for operation at the low voltage contact limit, okay, which we talked about a little bit in Part 1. This is a lower voltage. This is not our 120 volt applications, okay? These are low voltage contact limit devices, usually powered through a power supply or a transformer with a insulated primary to secondary or a metal barrier that is a grounded insulator. And that's what we're talking about here in 680.23a2. Talks about the construction of how to achieve that with a transformer or power supply. Okay. Other than that, then they have to be ground fault circuit interrupter protected. Okay. So all others, okay? Note again that the 680.23a2 reminds us, as I said, there's a separation between primary to secondary, whether it's a grounded metal barrier or via double insulation between the primary to secondary. All right? How about the voltage limitation? All right, so we have operating voltage. No luminaire shall be installed for operation on supply circuits over 150 volts between conductors. Now, that's the luminaire. Now, we're dealing with the submersible pumps or other submersible equipment. They're going to operate at 300 volts or less between conductors. So the lighting, you're looking at 120 volt type of applications. They can't operate over that. So that's the typical voltage that we'd run into. And then the submersible pumps, 300 volts or less between conductors. That covers a 277 application. That covers a 240 application. That covers, the 120 applications. When you're dealing with voltages, all of those aspects are covered under this one. So you have those voltage limitations that you have to keep in mind. Luminaire lenses, 680.51. So you have these luminaires. If they're installed in these fountains, then you're going to have these luminaire lenses requirement here. And it says luminaires shall be installed with the top of the luminaire lens below the normal water level of the fountain unless it's listed for above the water location. Okay. Then it says a luminaire facing upwards shall comply with either 1 or 2. Okay, so I can have a luminaire that's facing upwards, but it's got to be what? A lens guarded to protect, to prevent contact by a person, by any person, okay, and 2, be listed for use without a guard. Okay, so if I want to face up one, I've got to meet 1 or 2 here. Otherwise, I put one in the sidewall, or I put one that's rated, that's listed for above the water, or I put one in the water that's not face up, but maybe it's facing or at an angle, 45 or whatnot. Anyway, I'm looking for a luminaire that's listed for this environment. Overheating protection, 680.51d. Overheating protection. Electrical equipment okay, that depends on submersion for safe operation shall be protected against overheating by a low water cutoff or other approved means where not submerged. So if the water gets down during the summer, it evaporates out, and because of this luminaire or this certain type of equipment that really depends on this water in order to keep it from overheating, what's going to happen when the water gets too low is that it's going to cause it to overheat. So it has to have some kind of protection in there in order to protect against the overheating component. Okay. .680.51e, the wiring for these fountains. It says, all right, wiring. Equipment shall be equipped with provisions for a threaded conduit entry or be provided with a suitable flexible cord. Okay. So we're dealing with the wiring. This is equipment shall be equipped with this provision. So whatever the equipment we're actually going to install inside of this fountain. Okay. So I have seen them that design the equipment is actually designed for a flexible cord. We're going to see some limitations to that as well as far as the cord length, but I have seen them designed that way. Now, the maximum length of each exposed cord in a fountain shall be limited to 10 feet. Okay, so where we do use the cord, we are going to limit it to 10 feet. Cords extending beyond the fountain's perimeter, okay, the perimeter of the fountain, shall be enclosed in approved wiring enclosures. Okay, so it's going to have to be enclosed in an approved wiring enclosure. Now, metal parts of equipment in contact with the water, now we're talking about the equipment that's in the fountain, shall be brass or other approved corrosive resistant metal. Okay, hopefully that's going to all be taken care of by the equipment that's designed to go in the fountain. Okay, but just keep that in mind that if it's the metal parts are in contact with the water, it's got to be either brass or approved corrosive resistant metal, maybe even stainless steel or something like that. Now let's talk about the servicing and the stability. So when we had this equipment that's located inside of the pool, and again we're dealing with 51, so we're dealing with luminaires, submersible pumps, and other submersible equipment. So we're talking about all of them here. We have to understand that it's got to be able to be serviced, and we have to make sure that it is stable within the environment that it's placed. So when you see F here with the 680.51F, it says all equipment shall be removable from the water for relamping or normal maintenance. Okay, so it can be mounted, but it has to be in a way that it can be removed. Now, it says luminaires shall not be permanently embedded into the fountain structure such that the water level must be reduced or the fountain drained for relamping, maintenance, or inspection. So I have to give some kind of thought on how I'm putting these luminaires in there. Okay, so I can't permanently embed them to the point that I have to drain the water down in order to work on them. Okay, or even inspect them. So keeping that all in mind, think about your application when you're putting these luminaires in. All right. Now, what about the stability of the equipment? Equipment shall be inherently stable or be securely fastened in place. All right. So if equipment looks like it's not there, it's going to topple over. I have seen pumps installed and that they have a real narrow base and they're not securely stable and they fall over. Different things like that. So this is just a rule that says, look, everything that we're talking about in 680.51, which is dealing with luminaires, submersible pumps, and other submersible equipment, whatever that may be, that equipment has to be inherently stable in its installation. Otherwise, I have to securely fasten in place. All right. Now, we got two slides here that are incorporated together. We're jumping into junction boxes, okay? Where the junction boxes are used, and we're talking about either above junction boxes or junction boxes that are under the water, okay? It basically, the general rule is telling us, hey man, junction boxes and other enclosures used for other than underwater installations, so this would be anything used above the water, has to comply with 680.24. So we've got requirements in 680.24 for junction boxes, and we have to meet those junction boxes requirements. Now, we've already discussed most of the 680.24. We discussed that back in part 2, and we went into extensive detail, so I encourage you to go back and watch part 2. If you have a issue with a junction box above the water line that you're dealing with a fountain, then you've got some requirements here that you have to meet. Now, what about underwater junction boxes or other underwater enclosures? It says junction boxes and other underwater enclosures shall meet the requirements of 680.52B1 and B2. All right? So we've got to meet those requirements of both B1 and B2. Well, what's B1 say? Well, B1 has a construction requirement. There's an A and there's a B. So A says, okay, if this underwater junction box or other underwater enclosure, the construction, it has to be underwater enclosure, shall be equipped with provisions for threaded conduit entries or compression glands or seals for a cord entry. Okay, so I have to have that type of gland or connector gland that is designed and it seals for use in that location. They do make them. In fact, NEMA makes certain enclosures depending on the installation. They have the NEMA enclosure ratings, and so NEMA has a NEMA Dacia 250 that the NEMA reps are more than happy to come and do a presentation on that really talk about the different junction boxes and the ratings that can be in this environment. Okay, so I got to make sure I have that part of the construction. And the second part says underwater enclosures shall be submersible and made of copper, brass, or other approved corrosive resistant material. Okay, so we have that application that we've got to deal with. All right, so that's the B1. Now the B2 component talks about the installation of those underwater enclosures. All right, so what it says here is underwater enclosures installations shall comply with A and B. Well, A says this: if I'm going to stick these underwater enclosures, they shall be filled with an improved potting compound that prevents the entry of moisture. Okay, so we've got that requirement, so I've got to fill it with potting material. And B says underwater enclosures shall be firmly attached to the supports or directly to the fountain surface and bonded as required. Now, where the junction box is supported only by conduits in accordance with 314.23 E and F, which is talking about a conduit-only supporting system and that type of thing, the conduit shall be of copper, brass, stainless steel, or other approved corrosion-resistant metal, okay, for those independently supported junction boxes, maybe by those raceways. Okay, and here's your raceway allowances. Now, where the box is fed by a non-metallic conduit, it shall be additionally supported in fasteners of copper, brass, or other approved corrosion-resistant material, and that's typically done to the sidewall or to the actual bottom of the fountain itself. Okay, so you have some mounting requirements. I encourage you to go back and look at 314.23 E and F. You'll see where you're actually going to support the actual junction box with the conduits itself and all those aspects of it. All right, so you've got to meet the requirements of both of these. You've got to meet the requirements of 680.52B1, which is the construction requirements that we just talked about, with the glands and the approved. The submersible has to be, the enclosure has to be made of brass or other corrosion-resistant material. Then we came to the installation where it says the enclosure has to be filled with a potting compound. All right, and then it has to be secured to the surface by a approved corrosion-resistant material if it is a non-metallic conduits, and if it's supported by metal conduits like brass, copper, stainless steel, or other corrosion-resistant material. You meet all those requirements in 314.23 E and F. Once you meet all those aspects of it, there you go. You've met both B1 and B2. Now, what about the bonding and the grounding aspect of it? So we're dealing with the fountains again, and we're going to talk about the bonding. It says all metal piping systems, okay, again, all metal piping systems associated with the fountain shall be bonded to the equipment grounding conductor of the branch circuit supplying the fountain, okay? And again, just to remind you that those equipment grounding conductors are going to be sized based on 250.122 of the National Electrical Code. That's going to take you back to Chapter 2 requirements in 250. All right, size it based on the size of the overcurrent protection device ahead of it, of that circuit. Okay, so that's the bonding aspect is done that way. What about the grounding? The following equipment shall be grounded. Okay, so this is the bonding of the metal piping system that's utilizing the equipment grounding conductor. Okay, here it's talking about the equipment itself. It says all electrical equipment that's located within the fountain, okay, within the fountain, or within 5 feet of the inside wall of the fountain has to have an equipment grounding conductor in it. It's got to have some grounding component in it. Okay, we're not bonding here, we're grounding at this point. Now, it says here, all electrical equipment associated with the recirculating system of the fountain the equipment has to be grounded. Panel boards that are not part of the service equipment and that supply any electrical equipment associated with the fountain have to be grounded. And of course it is, if it's a remote distribution panel, it's probably going to have, most notably in accordance with 250.32b, it's going to have 4 conductors, 2 ungrounded conductors, or your hot conductors, 1 grounded neutral conductor, and then of course you're going to have your equipment grounding conductor. So the equipment grounding conductor is going to be there, so the panel board is going to be taken care of. All right, so those are your 3 methods to achieve the grounding of the equipment. Now, how do we do? We have some methods of grounding. And A, applied provisions, and again the provisions of 680.21a, we're dealing with motors. 680.23b3, we're dealing with luminaires, and so all of this, junction boxes, and again we're dealing also with the feeders that apply here. So all these methods apply here when they're dealing with the grounding, and they all have their own components that require the grounding aspect of it, equipment grounding conductors and whatnot. But what we get in here is, what if it's supplied? Now, this is the provision that requires you to have that equipment grounding conductor anyway. Now, but what about if we're supplying it from a flexible cord? Well, if we're doing so, it says the electrical equipment that is supplied by a flexible cord shall have all exposed non-current carrying metal parts grounded by an insulated copper equipment grounding conductor that is integral part of the cord. Just so you know, this equipment is going to be supplied by this cord. It's going to have a lug in there that makes that connection, and it's going to actually connect all of these non-current carrying metal parts together in connection with that equipment grounding conductor. All right, and most notably, most of the electrical equipment that is listed for use in a fountain, for example, is going to make sure that this is already incorporated. All right. Now, the equipment grounding conductor shall be connected to an equipment grounding terminal in the supply junction box, transformer enclosure, power supply enclosure, or other enclosures. So you're going to have to make that connection if you have the junction box, transformer enclosure, power supply enclosure, or whatnot. That equipment grounding conductor that is supplied, if it is utilized, has to be grounded to the equipment grounding conductor. All right, what about signs and fountains? So now we're kicking in, we're not just talking about luminaires in there now, we're moving into signs that are in the fountain. So the general rule here is this section covers electric signs that are actually installed within a fountain or within 10 feet of the fountain's edge. Okay, so it's either in the fountain or it's also within 10 feet of the fountain's edge. It says, ground fault circuit interrupter protection for personnel. That means that the branch circuits or feeders that are supplying the sign shall have ground fault circuit interrupter protection for personnel. All right. So if we're dealing with the sign, we're going to have that. Incidentally, in the 2014 code, the term branch circuit and or feeder was added. Okay, just for clarity. All right. Now we're going to get into is number 1, the location. It's dealing with fixed or stationary signs. So it says a fixed or stationary electric sign that is installed within a fountain shall be not less than 5 feet from the inside of the fountain measured from the outside edge of the fountain. So you measure from the outside edge and you measure in, and it can't be any closer than 5 feet. Okay, kind of putting it out into the actual fountain itself, kind of outside of the reach, if you will. Next is, what about portable signs located in a fountain? A portable electric sign shall not be placed within a pool or fountain or within 5 feet measured horizontally from the inside wall of the fountain. So again, we're going to not have any of those portable electric signs installed within 5 feet of that fountain, that inside wall of that fountain. And it certainly can't be placed within the fountain. All right, what about disconnection means? A disconnection means a sign shall have a local disconnection means in accordance with 600.6 and 680.12. The 680.12 was your maintenance disconnection means, and this is a switch right here just making sure the reminders of things like making sure that you disconnect all ungrounded conductors and what have you. If you want more detail on the switch for signs, go to 600.6, but basically that sign has a disconnect. It's got to comply with 600.6 and 680.12. Now, bonding and grounding, a sign shall be grounded and bonded in accordance with 600.7. Okay? And just for the heck of it, just because I know that there's always somebody out there who goes, well, Paul, you talked about those, but you didn't elaborate on them. So I'm going to elaborate on them just so people understand it. So 600.6, when you're dealing with the disconnect, the reason it references it back for the sign is because 600.6 says that each sign or outline lighting system, feeder circuit or branch circuit supplying a sign shall be controlled by an externally operable switch or circuit breaker that opens all the ungrounded conductors and controls no other load. Okay? The switch or circuit breaker shall operate all ungrounded conductors simultaneously. Okay, so that's kind of the aspects that we're kicking back to, reminding those applications. All right, and you also have other requirements that are there as well, but that's the general rule that we're going to follow. And then of course 600.6 also kicks in the within sight. The disconnection means shall be within sight of the sign, where the disconnect means is out of sight of the sign in any section or able to be energized. The disconnection means shall be lockable in accordance with 110.25 and all that. So you have some requirements here that you have to meet for the sign itself. We're talking about the disconnect, and that sign has to have that local disconnect. And of course, since 600.6 is dealing with electric signs, it's going to remind you that these rules apply. Okay? And again, this was your maintenance disconnect requirement. Again, don't confuse this with a, I think it's the 680.41 emergency switch. This is a maintenance disconnect switch that's required for that fountain and that sign. Okay, in this case, for the sign. All right, and then of course 600.7 is dealing with the grounding and bonding, and that's really the equipment grounding component that we're talking about. Making sure you have an equipment grounding conductor that is of the type that's listed in 250.118 and all those applications, and sizing the equipment grounding conductor in accordance with 250.122. And making sure that all equipment grounding conductor connections are in accordance with 250.8 and what have you. So this is just giving you some information to remind you about that aspect of it. All right. So hopefully that kind of didn't want to go too far back on that, but just kind of giving you the additional information on that to help you out. All right. All right. Let's move on. All right. 680.58. Okay. We're going to deal with GFCI protection for adjacent receptacle outlets. All right, it says GFCI protection for adjacent receptacle outlets. All 15 and or 20 ampere single phase 125 volt through 250 volt receptacles located within 20 feet of the fountain's edge shall be provided with GFCI protection. Okay, so that's your rule there on that. All right, well, believe it or not, that is it. So let me bring it back. Again, this one was done under 30 minutes. So you see, part 2 is the longest in the series. This one was done under 30 minutes. And again, we tried to cover all the aspects of fountains and not digging too deep that it causes confusion to anybody. Kind of give you the basic information, encouraging you to venture into the National Electrical Code. And looking at Part 5, I would prefer you look at all of 680. But if the only thing you deal with is fountains, okay, so here you go. Part 5 is for you. Again, all the other parts are available on our YouTube channel. Part 1, again, is general applications, the general requirements, which are going to apply throughout all of the parts within 680. You got Part 2, which is permanently installed pools. You got Part 3, storable pools. You got Part 4, which is hot tubs and spas. You got Part 5, we're dealing with fountains. Part 6, you're dealing with hydrotherapy, tanks and tubs. And of course, Then we're going to get into hydro massage bathtubs and ended up at part 7. So hopefully you got something out of all this. Again, visit our website at masterthenec.com, .net, or .org. If you have an email, a question to us, do so at info@masterthenec.com. More than happy to answer your questions. We love answering your code questions, giving you interpretations, giving you the good and the bad, the what-if effects of the code and how you apply the code. We love doing all that. Visit our Twitter account, which is at Master The NEC. Again, our Facebook page is Master The NEC. Go search for that. Go to our message board, post questions, register for an account. I have a chat room there. Keep it clean, and hopefully you learn something. Again, if you didn't learn anything, I'm sorry. If you came here and you already knew everything about it and you just came here because you just hate Paul Abernathy, hey, I just took 30 minutes of your life you'll never get back. I'm already on top, right? You might hate me, but I'm already ahead of you. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully you got something out of it. Take care until next time. And again, our next episode is going to be on the hydrotherapy tubs and yeah, that's what we're talking about. What is it? I don't even know what we're talking about. What are we talking about? Hydro massage therapy. Wow. I don't even, you know what? Those are therapeutic tubs. Those are hydrotherapeutic tanks. God, I hope I can learn something during that one. All right, so anyway, stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something. And I did run 1 minute over 30, so sorry. Okay, go back and watch all those other episodes. Peace.